Okay, so this is the topic of my presentation, and when I was out in the lobby, I noticed there were quite a few long-term residents here who probably know a good portion of this, but we also have a lot of new residents here in the Gallatin area who probably are not aware of the history of land ownership in the forest. And I think knowing the history is important because it helps us make good decisions about the future of this landscape. So here's an overview of what I'm going to be speaking about tonight. About 20 minutes, figure approximately 30 seconds per slide. Some of the slides I'll read to you. Some of them, because they're a little bit long, I'll just ask you to read them to save time. So tonight we're going to be talking about the complex land ownership of this area beginning in 1862. We're going to talk about Big Sky, the highlight porcupine buffalo horn wilderness study area in the Gallatin Range, the world-class wildlife habitat of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the Gallatin Forest Partnership beginning in 2017, and then we're going to touch on mountain bikes and motorized recreation. Headlines like this, we're seeing them far too often nowadays, and what we're not seeing is headlines that tell us how we're going to reverse this catastrophic decline in wildlife populations worldwide. We're in a very lucky position here. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem today has every species of wildlife still living here that it did when Columbus landed. And there's no place else in the lower 48 that can make that claim, not even close. So let's get started on land ownership. This is a 1961 map of the Gallatin National Forest that I got from my friend Joe Gutkowski. And just to orient you, here's Bozeman up here, Yellowstone National Park at the bottom of the map. This is Big Sky, and this is the Taylor Fork. Here's the Gallatin River and the Yellowstone River. So the topic of tonight is the Gallatin Range. And what you can see here in this 1961 map is a rather complex pattern of ownership. On this map, the green squares, each is a 640-acre section. Those at this time, belonged to the Forest Service, and the white sections were all private land. And we'll get into the ownership of that in just a couple of minutes. So again, this is the same map and some information here. This checkerboard pattern, that we call it, began in the mid-1800s. The federal government wanted to incentivize railroads to lay track. And what the federal government did is they told the railroad, you guys lay the track, and for X number of miles on either side of the track, you will get every other section of land. And that's how this happened. This actually totaled in the western United States 180 million acres that was granted to railroads. As you can imagine, this makes things difficult to manage. The other thing that happened with this land that really complicated things was changing ownership. In 1961, this was owned by Plum Creek, which was a logging company. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Then it was owned by Big Sky Lumber, and we're also going to talk about a developer named Tim Blixseth, who appeared on the scene. There was a lot of speculation and unscrupulous leverage to swap land between the Forest Service and the private landowners. And it resulted in things like the Yellowstone Club, Moonlight Basin, the privatization of Jack Creek, which is prime elk habitat, or was prime elk habitat. Well, anyway, all of this was fixed with a process called consolidation using land swaps. And this process took over 3 decades to complete. I'm only going to be showing you some of the major highlights of it. It was pretty complicated, and we don't have time to go into every single deal that was made. You probably recognize most of these places as places where Bozemanites recreate today. If you take a look at what this place looked like in 1961, every one of those popular hiking, biking, fishing, hunting areas was checkerboarded. So, for example, if you were going to be hiking to Palisade Falls from Highlight Reservoir, you were passing through both public and private land. The same would have been true in Cottonwood Creek if you were hiking to the summit of Mount Blackmore. And this was all okay as long as the private landowners had no problem with you being there. So going back to what's shown on that map, all of the white sections were owned by Burlington Northern Railroad because of the railroad land grants. And they operated their timberlands under the name of Plum Creek Timber, which provided saw logs for the Belgrade sawmill. At the time, Plum Creek allowed public access on all of its lands, so no problem. Nobody was too concerned about what may happen in the future. Many of the hiking trails and roads that were used by the public traversed both ownerships. Taking a little closer look at the map, this is an area called, in 1961, it was called the West Fork of the Gallatin. It eventually became known as Big Sky. And some of the landmarks on here, this is the entrance this is the Gallatin River. This is the entrance to Big Sky. This is Ouzel Falls. Here's the Yellow Mule Cabin, and this is Lone Peak. And you can see every other section is private and then Forest Service. This place had extremely high value as wildlife habitat in 1961. Elk and other wildlife would migrate out of Yellowstone Park through Big Sky and then over the Madison Range into the low, warm, snow-free grasslands of the Madison Valley. And just a quick story I'll tell you about this. I have a friend who grew up here, and I was talking with him last week, and he told me that his family used to go camping at Ouzel Falls. And he has a little bit of a tendency to exaggerate, but what my friend Lance told me was when they left the highway at the entrance to quote-unquote Big Sky, it took them an hour in four-wheel drive low to go the 5 miles to Ouzel Falls. Now it takes 5 minutes. So now we'll get into the subject of land exchanges. This is chapter 1. In the 1970s, the checkerboard pattern was hindering the development of the proposed new Big Sky ski resort that was spearheaded by Chet Huntley, who was most likely just a figurehead frontman. The big money behind it was Burlington Northern, which owned every other section, and also Chrysler Corporation invested in it. The plan, however, was hindered by the checkerboard pattern, and I have to assume, that there was intensive lobbying in Washington to do things to make this ski area happen. And ultimately, the Big Sky Resort or the Big Sky Ski Corporation, whatever they were called at the time, they acquired 10,000 acres of public land, which consolidated their ownership. And as far as I'm concerned, this set the stage for the exploitation of the West Fork of the Gallatin or Big Sky. The New York Times reported on the land exchange, and let's take a look at what it says in that little box there. Department of Agricultural officials in Washington commenting on the land exchange stated that the adverse environmental impact of the development would be minimal. Well, here's minimal. This is Big Sky from an airplane, what it looks like a couple of years ago. Here's another picture of minimal impact. Another picture of minimal impact. For those of us who were living here and saw all of this happen, this was traumatic for us. And we saw Big Sky go from wildlands to what we called, or what I call, a sacrifice area. This is a 1986 map of Big Sky, and the colors on here are a little bit different. The white that you see here is all of the consolidated land that was owned by the Big Sky Ski Resort Company. The pink land is Burlington Northern, so there must have been some other small-scale exchanges going on to eliminate the Forest Service sections in here and transfer those to Burlington Northern, and significantly across the Madison Range in Jack Creek, going down towards the Madison River, this was also all consolidated. And this was tremendous elk habitat. I'm sure that a few still pass through there, but it is nothing compared to the habitat that it used to be. So getting into Chapter 2 now, we have to meet this guy, Mr. Tim Blixseth. The big picture is Tim standing in front of the Yellowstone Club, one of the buildings there in the early days. This picture up here, I believe this is a mugshot that was taken when he was being indicted for tens of millions of dollars of financial improprieties. Anyway, what happened was in 1992, Plum Creek Timber, Burlington Northern, decided they wanted out of the land ownership business and out of the timber business here. So they put their land all up for sale, and it was a long story, but in the end, Tim Blixseth and his company, Big Sky Lumber, based out of Oregon, wound up buying all of the Burlington Northern land. And these became desperate times for public lands in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The first thing Blixseth did was said no trespassing. So all of the trails and roads that everybody hiked on and hunted and recreated on, all of a sudden closed. You can't go there anymore. And we have to imagine that even before Blixseth laid the money down, he recognized the development potential in Big Sky. And this was probably his end game. He was into cutting logs and selling lumber. But I think that his main goal when he bought the Burlington Northern land was he saw the development potential in Big Sky. In the early days, the Big Sky ski resort had some rocky years, but by 1992, the resort, I think, had demonstrated that it was going to be very successful, and he had some big plans for the remainder of the Big Sky area. So Blixseth, he was just ruthless. He threatened to log, subdivide, and build roads into every section of the former Plum Creek land, which included the porcupine buffalo horn drainages, crucial wildlife habitat for wildlife migrating out of Yellowstone, Cottonwood Creek, where we like to hike, the face of the Gallatins, which is the Bozeman viewshed, the highlight area. As I mentioned earlier, the Bozeman community was traumatized. There were stories showing up in the paper every couple of weeks, and we couldn't believe what we were seeing, what was happening. So anyway, what Blixseth was essentially saying to the Forest Service, you give us our choice of public land and timber, Big Sky, and we'll give you the Gallatin Range. And that is essentially what happened. It resulted in what was called the Grand Bargain, and there were two bills that passed through Congress in 1993 and 1998. And let's talk about those land swaps a little bit. So what happened is we saw a complete transfer consolidation of all the Big Sky public land sections to Blixseth. He started the Yellowstone Club, the Moonlight Basins development in Jack Creek, the Spanish Creek Mountain Club, all high-end, expensive, exclusive subdivisions in Big Sky. And as far as I'm concerned, this completed the wholesale development of the entire Big Sky area, and it's continuing today. If you go up there, it's a zoo. Contractors everywhere, building going on, gravel trucks going up and down 191. So Blixseth also got lands in the Bangtail, which he extensively logged. And I think we can see the results of that if you go to the Bangtails today. What the public got was land in the Gallatin Range forming the highlight porcupine buffalo horn wilderness study area. And that's this today. We have Bozeman up here, Big Sky over here, Yellowstone National Park on the bottom. So essentially, the highlight porcupine buffalo horn wilderness study area runs the entire length of the Gallatin Range, almost all the way to Highway 191, and it provides a migration corridor for wildlife that potentially can leave Yellowstone Park, migrate through the Gallatin Range, take the risk of crossing 191, and do that genetic exchange that Michael was talking about in his introductory remarks. So that's what we have today. We have this wilderness study area that was created in 1977, and you notice that it's all green, which is what we want. So what did the public get? Well, this is the highlight area. Here's Emerald Lake, Highlight Reservoir, Palisade Falls, or Mount Blackmore. So all of these white sections turned green, which is great. It's a great place now for the public to recreate, and it belongs to all of us. No more private land there. The other thing that the public got, and this is a focus of tonight's discussion, is just north of Yellowstone National Park and just across the street from Big Sky, we got all of these white sections in Porcupine Creek and Buffalo Horn Creek. And again, notice how close these are to Yellowstone National Park. This is crucial wildlife habitat for wildlife coming out of Yellowstone National Park, which, by the way, has an average elevation of 7,000 feet. Wildlife cannot survive in Yellowstone in the winter. They need places like this to go. So again, this is the Highlight Porcupine Wilderness Study Area, Highlight Porcupine Buffalo Horn Wilderness Study Area as it exists today. And when those two acts to facilitate these land exchanges were being heard by Congress, the Wilderness Society and the Greater Yellowstone sent a representative to testify for these land exchanges. His name was Michael Scott. I'm not going to read this to you. You can read what he said before Congress. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Good? This is further testimony that Mr. Scott gave to Congress. And again, I'm not going to read this. To save time, you can just read it yourselves. And it's important here that you note who he was testifying for when he gave this testimony. I'm going to read the bottom. H.R. 873 will facilitate future wilderness designation for the Highlight Porcupine Buffalo Horn Wilderness Study Area. That's what the Wilderness Society and the Greater Yellowstone Coalition said to get this bill passed. This is what the Highlight Porcupine Buffalo area looks like. As I said, Yellowstone, average elevation 7,000 feet. When wildlife migrate out of the park, this is where they go when they go north. And you can see how valuable this is. It's interspersed forest and meadows, a lot of grass, low relief. It's not terribly hilly, low elevation. It's great wildlife habitat and great winter range. And one of the conclusions that I take from the information that I presented to you so far is that given the sacrifices of wildlands and wildlife habitat that have occurred as a result of the creation and the finagling of Big Sky, there is every reason to provide maximum protections to the lands that were required as a result of the land swaps. Thank you. I'm glad to hear you agree with me. All right, so now, 2017. We have this new group that shows up, calling themselves the Gallatin Forest Partnership, and all of a sudden they're telling us they have land-managed solutions for the Gallatin Range that will benefit all. How about wildlife? Let's take a look at what they're proposing. So first of all, this is a list of the core members of the Gallatin Forest Partnership. We have the Wilderness Society, the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, and then a group that used to call itself the Montana Wilderness Association. They're not into wilderness anymore. Now they're Wild Montana. And this is the name of their act that they introduced a couple of months ago, the Greater Yellowstone Conservation and Recreation Act. And don't take my word for it when I tell you about this bill. Read it yourself. It's online. You just have to Google Gallatin Forest Partnership, and if you poke around, you'll find every word of this bill that they want Congress to pass. Here's what they want to do. This is the Highlight Porcupine Buffalo Horn Wilderness Study Area. Here's the Gallatin River, Paradise Valley, Bozeman up here. So this is the highlight area right now where about 1 million people a year go to recreate. And what the Forest Partnership wants to do is they want to remove all of this land from the wilderness study area and turn it into something else. You can read the act and see what their intentions are. They also want to remove, crucially, and of great concern, all of this land in the Porcupine-Buffalo Horn Wilderness Study Area that's just north of Yellowstone Park, possibly the most crucial wildlife habitat in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And again, read the act yourself. It is filled with loopholes. It says it's going to do certain things in the first sentence or two, and then you start reading the subparagraphs, and it's like, oh, nothing is set in stone in this bill. And again, I remind you of what the Wilderness Society of the Greater Yellowstone testified at in Congress. The wild core of the Gallatin Range needs to be protected. So why are they doing this? What could possibly be their motivation when they lobbied intensely for the passage of these beneficial land swaps in the early 90s? Well, here's what's changed. The Gallatin Forest Partnership has 5 mountain biking groups. And I want you to notice there are no wilderness advocacy groups on here. I'm sorry. At the formational meeting of the Gallatin Forest Partnership, myself and 4 other members of the Gallatin Wildlife Association attended the meeting and said, we want to be part of this. We feel that there should be advocacy for wildlife in this process. We were never invited back to the next meeting. No wildlife advocacy. And at least one of those mountain biking groups are affiliated with IMBA, the International Mountain Biking Association. It's a trade organization that wants to sell more mountain bikes. I'll let you read for yourselves direct quotes from the IMBA website. Especially the bottom 2. This sounds way too familiar as far as what's going on. Obviously, IMBA is not into wilderness. So, just kind of review for you, some of the ways I look at this bill. Mountain bikes will now be permitted in all of the areas that are presently wilderness study area that don't allow mountain biking. And the land use decisions, a wilderness study area can only be altered by Congress. If this bill passes, the Forest Service can make changes on the fly to the way these areas are managed. For example, if 10 years down the road we get a new forest supervisor here in Bozeman, and that individual decides, well, snowmobiles really are appropriate on all of these trails, it's a done deal. It's no longer in the hands of Congress. Just take a quick look at mountain biking. I found this on the web. This is demographics of mountain bikers. 50% of them are 20 to 30 years old. 73% male. 67% white. So we're going to change the management of crucial wildlife habitat to allow mountain bikes to enter an area that's going to actually serve a very small subset of the population, a bunch of fit, young, white males. Why? So again, this is to highlight what they're proposing in the Porcupine-Buffalo Horn area. And one of my main concerns about this is that this area is perilously close to Big Sky. It's right across the street. And I think that any management changes that occur in the wilderness study area that permit more and varied uses are going to be immediately exploited by businesses in Big Sky. Here's what I'm concerned about. I could see a business in Big Sky deciding, well, let's buy a fleet of 50 electric mountain bikes and we'll start leading day tours up Highlight Creek and Porcupine Creek. And I'm sorry, not Highlight, Buffalo Horn Creek and Porcupine Creek. Maybe we'll get to see some grizzly bears and wolverines. Maybe there'll be some elk wintering in there or grazing in there. And notice that International Mountain Biking Association fully endorses mountain bikes on all mountain bike trails. I'm almost done, just a couple more slides. I pulled this picture off of the Southwest Montana Mountain Bike Association website. And the story behind this is there's a popular hiking and mountain biking trail really close to Bozeman called Leverage Canyon. And the way they described the story on their website was that SWMBA, the Southwest Montana Mountain Bike Association, they decided that there were some places on the trail that were dangerous, that weren't working real well. So they got permission from the Forest Service to do some improvements on the trail. And the Forest Service allowed them to drive in there with a mini excavator and improve the trail. Now, would this be allowed in the wilderness deletions that the Gallatin Forest Partnership is proposing? I have no idea, but it's a fear that I have. So to kind of wrap this up, this is what we sacrificed in the land exchanges. This is what we saved. It's beautiful, quality, close to Yellowstone wildlife habitat. And I believe that because of what happened with the land exchanges and the sacrifices that were made, that the entire Hyalite porcupine, buffalo horn wilderness study area deserve maximum wilderness protection. This is a new study that was just released by Todd Wilkinson, and this is my big concern, and it's the big concern of a lot of people, including Todd, who has advocated for the GYE for decades. Unending population growth and development threaten the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We're building homes, we're recreating on the forest land, we're loving it to death. There has to be some restraint. We cannot loosen restrictions. So we have an alternative bill that we call the Gallatin Yellowstone Wilderness Act. I'm not going to get into any detail on this except to tell you that all of the black areas on here, this is the Crazy Mountains up here, this is the Pryor Mountains, all of these black areas are Forest Service inventoried roadless areas. And we believe that all of those, because they're roadless, should be designated wilderness. This would be 1.1 million acres of new wilderness. So that's thinking big, if you want to think bigger than the Gallatin Forest Partnership. Now, I'm a bit radical as far as what I would like to see, but if you want to think really, really big, this is what I think should happen. I think all of the Forest Service land, BLM land, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service land within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem should be turned over to the National Park Service. And we'll wind up with a 23 million acre Greater Yellowstone National Park, guaranteed for security for wildlife, tremendous economic benefits to the entire region. Future generations will be eternally grateful. Thank you.